Before we begin, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your console space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner of the slide area. Today's presentation consists of slides and screen share. For an optimal viewing experience, please ensure that you have checked system requirements along with bandwidth considerations. Webinars are bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help conserve your bandwidth. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help link located via the question mark widget at the bottom left of your screen, where you will find details about system requirements and frequently asked questions. If you experience a blank screen during the presentation, please try refreshing your browser or pressing F5. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit these through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a more complete answer is needed or if we run out of time, we will reach out directly. Also, notice the Learn More widget. Here, we've added links to a recently published Forbes article, a blog that correlates with today's presentation, as well as a copy of today's slide presentation. We'd also like to encourage everyone to fill out our survey before the end of today's presentation. And by submitting your response, you will automatically be entered to win a $50 American Express gift card. We'll be selecting 3 lucky winners from today, so again, please, we encourage you to submit your answers. We are extremely pleased to have as our speakers today Compuware Solution Consultant Yvette Santana and Account Consultant Rob Gerner. We also have the pleasure of having Product Manager Jim Lieber assist with questions today, so please make sure you submit your questions through the Q&A widget. With that, I'd now like to welcome and hand things over to Rob. Rob?
Thank you, Janet. Good morning, everyone. The topic, the Compuware Path to True Mainframe Agility. Agility on the mainframe is a very, very timely topic. There's a lot of buzz attached to it, and more than that, at Compuware, we're seeing organizations actually take actions towards that path. So we want to help you in that pursuit as we discuss some of our key solutions, which again will be able to assist you in that migration. So we're going to be spending some time on Topaz for program analysis, the Runtime Visualizer in Topaz, Topaz for total test, unit testing on the mainframe, and Xpediter Code Coverage. So I have the pleasure actually of turning this over to Yvette Santana for the actual presentation. Yvette.
Hi, Rob. Thanks again. I'd like to share the Topaz Workbench with you. The Topaz Workbench has some components that will help you with that path to agility. Some of the issues that we encounter during the development process is that we are finding ourselves doing some of these tasks manually. You know, we get an application that we have to support, we have to develop some additional business logic in it, and we don't have a lot of knowledge with that application. I'm going to show you how you can take advantage of some of the tools within the Workbench to assist with that process. One of the first processes I would use is the Runtime Visualizer. The Runtime Visualizer allows you to visually see the application as it's executing. And it leverages the Expediter, the Expediter for Eclipse within Topaz. If I go into one of my debugging sessions, I can initiate a debugging session for the particular application that I'm looking to get some understanding. And one of the nice things about the visualizer is that you don't have to prepare the application like you normally would for a Expediter debugging session. I know that most of you are familiar with debugging products, and you understand that in order to get into a debugging session, you have to prepare the application. The nice thing about the Runtime Visualizer is you don't have to do that. You just go ahead and define the JCL into your debug session and just run it. Now, in this instance, I'm showing one that has been prepared for Expediter, but I don't need to actually go in and debug this application. All I'm trying to accomplish here is to get a visual of this application as you see here. Once the application is complete, you see that we have this visualization of it. If I go into the Runtime Visualizer perspective, as you know, Eclipse runs based on perspectives, I can get much more detail on this. You'll notice that one of the things that happens when I get into, when I complete the Runtime Visualizer is that I have these buttons that allow me to play back the execution. So immediately I can see that I have, you know, several tables, DB2 tables, some files that I'm dealing with, and if I hover over any of these icons, it'll give me the details of that particular component. You can see here that I'm calling a subprogram and a file and a DB2 table. Tells me exactly what's happening. I can actually get the details for each one of these if I chose. As you see here, I have a summary of that information. I can right-click on any of this, and this is one of the other advantages of working with an Eclipse-based framework. Everything is a right-click away. Any of the commands that are available are going to be displayed when I do the right-click. And as you see here, I have the summarized information for all of the events that took place. What's really great about this also is that I can, once I've run this and I've captured this information, I can export this and share it with the development team. It's very simple to do. You just right-click and you just export the file and share it with your colleagues. They can then import it into their workbench, and they can then see visually what's happening with that particular application. So once I have an understanding of the execution of this application, I might want to go in and do some static analysis of the application. Now, static analysis, which is the program analysis component, can be done a couple of different ways. One way can be done with just going into your source file. Again, we're dealing with source members here. And I can just double-click my program and bring up an edit of this application. And now you can see in the perspective, not only do I have the source listing here, and I've brought it into a Slick Edit session. And Slick Edit is an intelligent, an editor that has some intelligence built into it. But I also have an outline here so I can navigate into the different sections of the code using the outline. When I right-click, I can ask to perform the program analysis. When I do that, it brings me into the program analysis perspective. And as you see here, we have a structure chart available as well. And when I double-click that view, you see that I now have visually what's happening within this application. And we can bring this up to 100%. You can see that I have control over this. Now, the coloring within this structure chart defaults to the McCabe statistics, which is an industry standard that determines the complexity of the program. But I can change those color metrics to whatever it is that I'm interested in pursuing within this application, right? So if I want to see where all my program calls are, I can change the colorings and then right away see what paragraphs within this program contain those. I can look for file IOs, and you see how the colorings change. But I also want you to note that when I double-click any of these windows, you'll notice that the source then lines up within that, with that paragraph. But we also have some other views within program analysis that allows us to drill into the different sections. So if I want to see the logic flow of this particular paragraph, I just double-click the logic flow, and I can see a full view of it. If I'm interested in looking at any of the data components, I just need to click on that, and you'll see that one of the options is to look at the data flow. And if I expand this, I have some other options. So I can see right now how the data flows to it, but I can also show conditionals. I can see all the aliases associated with that data item, as well as how it flows from. So a lot of details provided to you within the program analysis. And as I mentioned, this is just a one program analysis that I'm doing. I can also set up a project within Topaz that allows me to build all the components associated with a particular application. In other words, things like the copybooks associated with an application, along with any other source libraries that comprise the entire application. And then I can do an analysis on that level. So in this case, I'm just doing a one program. If I chose to do an analysis on across programs, then I can go into the program once again, open up the program hierarchy, go into my program analysis perspective, and then see the hierarchy of this particular application. So here, I'm getting a sense now of not only do I need to be concerned about making changes to this program, but I need to also now add to my scope of my project some of these other programs that this program calls, should they be impacted by the changes I'm making. I can also do a copybook level hierarchy. So if I open up my copybook hierarchy, I can see all the copybooks that are associated with this particular program. And one of the copybooks, one of the changes that I need to make are part of this copybook item. And as you see here, if I double click it, I can open up the copybook itself and take a look at the details. But when I bring up that copybook in my library and ask for a copybook hierarchy, I am now going to get what are all the programs that this copybook is used by. So right now, I'm viewing what is included in this, but I'm going to change the perspective so that I can see who calls this copybook. And you can see right away, I have quite the list of programs that are impacted by any changes that I make to this particular copybook. And you can see that right away, I'm not only getting a visual understanding of the application as it executes, but as I do my static analysis, I'm getting an understanding of the scoping of this project. Should any of the changes I'm making to whether it be the program or the copybook, what are the other components that are affected by that? And I can do this quickly. You see how quickly I'm able to gather this information. And this is some of the things that we need in order to start that path down to agility, right? We need to speed up these processes of understanding the applications and scoping out our projects. So once we have an understanding of the applications, and I'm going to go ahead and close some of these views, we can then begin the process of making our changes and testing out our code. And one of the ways that we'll do that is leveraging the Expediter tool, one for debugging, right? So you want to be able to step into your application and debug the application. And two, we want to also be able to do things like capture code coverage statistics, right? Code coverage is another component of the Expediter tools that allow us to understand exactly what we've executed versus what we didn't execute based on the data that we're using for testing. When you're setting up an Expediter session, you just need to provide us with the JCL that you normally use to execute your program. Since the JCL already contains information about, where the program is executing out of, what are the inputs and outputs that the program needs, it makes sense to just provide us with that information. And some of the advantages of using Expediter is I can now view the JCL. You see it's pretty simple JCL. I can use the autofill button. So if I'm just newly creating this, we'll take the information out of the JCL and populate the details that Expediter needs in order to be able to intercept the job, such as the job name and the step and program that we're going to debug. We also provide you with all these tabs. So if I wanted to see visually what the application is doing, I can just check that off. And you just saw me perform that function, and you'll see some more of that as I progress through the demonstration. I also can collect the code coverage statistics. So I can specify here that I do want to collect code coverage statistics, and I just need to provide a repository. A repository is just a small file that we create using our utilities where the statistics are written. And then you just provide us with a system name and a test ID, which is essentially just the ability to see the statistics using this information. So once I've completed the debug, setup process of Expediter, I just need to initiate the debugging session. And we're always going to ask for your login credentials, either your TSO, user ID, and password, so that we can verify that you are authorized to use the resources that you're using. When I launch the debug session, Expediter perspective will be launched, and of course I need to reset my perspective. And you can see that I'm now in a debugging session. So I'm paused at the very beginning of the program. Again, we have this outline view which allows us to navigate into the source. So if I wanted to set breakpoints here, I can. And breakpoints, or actually issuing any Expediter command, is just a right-click away. As you see here, so all of the Expediter commands are available here, all the ones that you're used to seeing or initiating in the debugging session. Several ways that can be done. And we have our variables here, and then all of the breakpoints. One of the nice features of using the Eclipse based Expediter product is that a lot of the information that we retain, such as breakpoints or variables, are retained from session to session. So I'm just going to go ahead and resume execution here because I'm more interested in understanding what my program is executing based on the data that I've provided it. As you see here, as soon as the Expediter session is completed, it is asking me if I want to open up the code coverage perspective so that I can look at the reports. And you see here that it's provided me with all the statistics. So it's, my program contains 2 subroutines. So it's collected code coverage statistics for all of the programs that I've invoked during that Expediter debugging session. And it gives me the percentage of verbs that were executed as a result. So when I double click any of the modules, you'll see that I get this annotated listing. And I'm just going to expand this so that we can see more of that. There are several ways to navigate through the code coverage report to understand what are the statements that executed versus didn't execute. You see down here in the annotations, we show you that there are 95 statements that didn't execute and 141. So if I want to navigate into the code that didn't get executed, I can double-click this instruction and then quickly get navigated to the area that didn't execute as a result of using the test data that I did. And you see here that obviously I'm not providing a test case for part-time data. And so you see how code coverage is not only telling me what I've executed versus what I didn't execute, but it is also helping me understand what kind of data I need in order to ensure that I get the coverage that I'm anticipating during my testing. So it helps me create better test cases moving forward. Again, you can navigate using any of these as well. And you see here that we have a lot of unexecuted code. And so I'll obviously need to enhance my test data to ensure that I get the coverage that I'd like. So once I've used Expediter and code coverage to not only get a sense of the quality of the code, but the quality of the data that I'm using, I'm ready then to start generating test cases. Again, this is where Topaz can be really helpful. One of the difficulties that we have as developers is automating that process. Well, with Topaz, we've given you the capability of not only automatically generating these test cases, but also running these test cases. So once we've captured the information, we can just use the Topaz for total tests to invoke these test cases as we progress through the development cycle. So once again, I'm going to leverage Expediter for collecting a test case. And the reason why we use Expediter is because Expediter knows everything about the application during the Expediter debugging session, right? It has an understanding of what are the programs that are being called. It understands what all of your I/O is. So it's a perfect vehicle for creating your test cases. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and launch a debugging session. And when I get into the Expediter debugging session, one of the options I'll have once we pause in the program is to generate a test case. And so when I go ahead and generate this test case, he's going to bring up this additional panel that allows me to create a new test case, and we'll call this Webcast. And you notice that it defaults to my local Workbench workspace. However, I can write this to any shared drive if I chose to. And having the ability to write this to a shared drive is really good, because now when I create a test case, I can write it out to a shared drive where my team can access it, and now they have test cases that they can use when they go in and are developing for the same application that I'm working on. And so they don't have to go in and generate their own test cases unless they desire to, right? Unless they're looking for different information. So you see here, this is a DB2 application. It has DB2. I'm asking it to generate stubs for any of the subroutines that are being called. We default to 100. I don't have 100 calls within this, but if you have more, you can increase that number to however many subroutine calls you want to capture stubs for. So stubs, essentially in total test, are virtualizing that aspect of it, right? We're also going to generate stubs for I/O. So in this instance, we're generating stubs for any QCM or VCM data sets that I'm accessing in this application. And I'm generating both the read and the write assertions for it. So how am I going to compare this information? I want to collect what you're reading and what you're writing, and then I want to automatically generate what we call assertions or comparisons. Because this application contains DB2, I'm also going to generate stubs for the DB2 calls. Once I generate the stubs for the DB2 calls, I can elect to use those stubs in future executions of this test case, and then no longer have that reliance on the actual database itself. So I can elect, when I rerun these test cases, to choose to use the stubs versus the live data. And I think because of this webcast, things are running a little bit slow today. And so this is just going to go in and collect information. So as the program is executing, and we'll see this here, you can see that it's actually executing. It's collecting information about what this program is either reading or writing. If it's doing any subroutine calls, it's capturing all the linkage information for that subprogram and creating my test case for me. It does this automatically behind the scenes. I don't have to generate the interfaces or any of the components that are associated with defining these test cases. Total Test will do that automatically for me, and then I'll have a test case that I can use. And I'll just go into the Host Explorer right now and show you some of the existing projects that I've created, because this is where Total Test will actually create these test cases for you. As you see here, we already have a test case, and I'll just show you what those look like. So when this is completed, I'll have a test case that comprises all of the components that this application uses. You see here that we have all of the interfaces defined for that test case. Actually, let's use this guy here. So these are all the pieces associated with it, as well as the stubs that were generated. So the stubs essentially are, here's my subprogram. I called this subprogram 8 times during that execution. And you see that for each call, I capture the details for each one. Let's close this guy out so that we can see the full value. And so for every time I called it, whatever I passed within the linkage section, it was captured as part of the stub. And here we have our DB2 information. So I did the DB2 calls, and you see that you can see the full SQL statement as well as the contents. And here are your assertions. So these are my input assertions and how I'm comparing the fields when I go to rerun this test case. And this can be altered. Any of these can be altered. I can change the assertions to either not assert, so in other words, I'm not going to compare this field when I rerun it, or I can change it to any of these values. You also have control over the data. And so you can change the content. So if you're looking to improve your test cases, you can actually change the contents of those fields and rerun these test cases. So now to run the test case is fairly simple. You see here I have my scenario that has been defined, and this is going to leverage the stubs that I generated. Here's where I decide whether or not I want to use the stub or the virtualized components or use the real data. If I want to use either the real subroutines or the real data, then I would just remove the stub and rerun my test case. So I'm going to run my test case. I'm telling it to use Stubs. And I also have the ability of collecting code coverage statistics here as well. So I'm going to call this Webcast. And we're going to give it a test ID of test 3. And so I'm going to go ahead and just run my, okay, he's thinking about it. And so I'm just rerunning my test case. I've created my test case using Expediter, and now I'm just going to run my test case, and I've elected to collect code coverage statistics during that process. And once this completes, it'll tell me whether the test case was successful or not. And so as I'm making changes to the program, I can validate that the changes aren't having an impact on either the output. And you see here that my test case ran successfully. I have a 100% success rate. If there were any failures, we would identify them here, and you can navigate right to that area and see where the failure occurred and why. One other quick thing I want to point out is you'll notice that in the DB2 section, we have the SQL code that you can actually change that. So if you're trying to test your error handling routines, using total test is a great way to do it, right? Because a lot of times we have difficulties testing our error handling because we can't generate the right conditions with the live data. With total tests, you can simulate the data that you need in order to test some of those error handling routines. So you can get really full coverage of the application in terms of testing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rob Gerner. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Yvette, for taking the time, and this is really good information. So I hope everybody appreciates what we just saw. And as a quick review, Yvette just showed, with regards to our path to true mainframe agility, some tools that can actually help you in that pursuit. Topaz for program analysis, for deeper code visibility and program understanding. The Runtime Visualizer from Topaz, help you evaluate application execution. Topaz for total test to automate the creation and execution of unit tests. And Xpediter Code Coverage to determine if the code was executed. So let me just mention before we go to Q&A that we have surveys all of you have access to, and we certainly encourage you to fill out if you have any questions on any of the solutions. If you'd like more information, if you'd like to have another presentation or have a discussion at your site, just let us know. We're more than happy to arrange that at your convenience. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Just one more reminder that if they do fill out the survey, they get 3 chances of winning the $50 American Express gift card.
Good reminder. Very good reminder. So please do that. Here's a question, Yvette, that someone was curious about. Can you create total tests at the subroutine level or just at the main program?
No, you can create subprogram stubs as well. Yes. Yes, it can be done at the subroutine level as well. So you can set a breakpoint right before the call to your subprogram, step into the subprogram, and then generate your test case from that point.
Okay, fine. Appreciate that. There was a question about language requirements, which we probably want to cover. The question continued with COBOL, PL1, assembler. So just try to clarify that.
For Expediter, supports COBOL, assembler, PL1, and C.
All righty, appreciate that. How do you handle the local variable in the SQL statement?
How do we handle a local variable? Jim, do you?
I think that Yeah, I think that it's kind of an open-ended question, and it kind of covers another question we got where they're asking about data stubbing, and also even another question we got, which was, do you need the database connection? And kind of the answer to all of those is the first time when you generate the unit tests, what we do is we kind of stop at every SQL call and see the input to the SQL call, and let it go through to DB2, and then we see the output from the SQL call. And at that point, we can build stubs so you can then run your tests independent of DB2, because when you rerun your test and you turn on stubbing, when we see that SQL, let's say it's a fetch, we'll just return the results that were recorded in the first capture of the unit test. So I think that handles the how we would handle local variables, and then also kind of generally how the data stubbing works.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. Back to language for a second, or in this case, database question of Yvette. The question was, what about support for various databases like Adabase?
We support DB2 at this time for total test.
Thank you. A question came in. Can we load the test case generated from total test to a QA test storage software like HP ALM?
What was that question?
Maybe let's just deal with the. Let's remind you of the question. Can we load the test case generated from total test to a QA test storage software? Let's just leave it at that.
I'm assuming like this is a source management system. There are some source management systems that handle that. I know ISPW, we can load our test cases along with the source associated with it into ISPW.
I think
Marvelous,
we have
thank you.
I'm sorry, to be sensitive to everyone's time today, I think we can take maybe one or two more, and then for those questions that we don't get to before we close the webcast, we definitely will reach out directly. So, Rob, do you want to take one or two more?
Sure, thank you, Janet. Yvette, on which basis test case says successful, whether based on logic-wise or functionality-wise, or how precisely?
Oh, it's a combination of things, right? So if you've changed the logic in the code and it changes the results of the output, then that would cause a failure, right? Because it won't match what the assertions are set for. Unless that's what you anticipate, then you can change your assertions to work with that.
Thank you so much. Last question. How does Expediter on Topaz work with CICS screens?
So you're still going to need, it depends on how you invoke your transaction in a CICS environment. So you would still see your Expediter session in Eclipse, and then whatever form that you need to get through the application, you would need to go through that process. So if it's a application that's transaction-based, terminal-based, you would still need someone having to initiate that transaction in order to get into the Expediter debugging session. But the actual source and information for within the debugging session would be in the Eclipse workbench.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you,
Jim.
Yvette.
Thanks, Jim, Rob, Yvette, for all that insightful information. There was a lot of good questions coming in. If you have questions and you're still on the line, feel free to submit them. We will definitely be reaching out to you directly with that question, the answer to your questions. Great questions. We are very pleased that you were able to attend our webcast today. Again, please take the time to help you by completing our survey before you log off. And with that, I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.